Hello students, today we're going to be covering, really just going over the key highlights of JFK and the Cold War. Yesterday in class we watched that CNN video with all of the primary sources of the newscast going into really how JFK handled all of the situations where World War III could have broken out numerous times. Today in our notes we're going to be covering basically all the things we looked at yesterday, but really just handling more of the key highlights. So let's do that. All right, so JFK and the Cold War. First thing we're going to look at is the Berlin Wall. Now, you'll remember at the end of World War II, the Allies are going to divide Germany into 4 sections. Those 4 sections will eventually become West and East Germany. They're going to do the same thing with Berlin, and you guessed it, just like Germany becoming West and East, Berlin will also become West and East. Now, the United States, we are going to be basically in control of West Berlin, and the Soviets are going to be in control of East Berlin. Now, in the late 50s, early 60s, it was becoming an issue for the Soviets that really thousands of their citizens in East Berlin were fleeing and moving to the West. Now, the issue with that, if your citizens are openly fleeing your area, it's telling the rest of the world that that area is not a good area to live in, right? And so that's telling the world that these people don't want to live under communist rule anymore. They want to go to the capitalist free society, okay? So because of this, Khrushchev is going to demand that really the United States and her allies leave the city, okay? Now keep in mind, when we're talking about communism, and how the United States handles communism, remember our policy is one of containment. Okay, so if JFK were to just give the Russians West Berlin, that would make him seen as weak. Right? We're going against our policy that we've set up for many years. Right? So obviously Kennedy's going to refuse, but Khrushchev still has that issue. Okay, and so he's going to respond by building the Berlin Wall to keep citizens in and to keep them from leaving that section of the city, all right? And guards would really shoot anyone trying to flee from East to West Berlin. All right, you can go and look. There are numerous accounts of this happening. And the wall in itself is going to be up for a good chunk of the 20th century. From 1961, it's going to start out just as barbed wire. It'll eventually become more of the wall that you see in this picture here where we have barbed wire. We also have a concrete structure, an actual wall. Okay. Now, it's going to be created in 1961, and then it won't necessarily, quote-unquote, fall until 1989. All right, so some pictures of the wall before it fell. As you can see on this section of the wall, we have a bunch of graffiti. Communist guards suck. I like this one right here. And this section of the wall is on the free zone. So we're in West Berlin looking at the wall. Now this picture here is looking at the wall from the communist side. And you can note, citizens do not have a chance of getting near that wall. That wall has no graffiti on it. There are no people near the Brandenburg Gate, which is one of the top tourist attractions in Germany today. Right? When I went to Germany and we went and visited the Brandenburg Gate, you can go right up in it. You can walk underneath it. It's remarkable. Okay. Another section of Berlin that I visited while there was Checkpoint Charlie. It was a checkpoint that you could go through to get into the other side of the city if you had a visa or if you were allowed to. This sign that we saw said you are now leaving the American sector. And I do like that there is a KFC sign up there. It's just kind of funny. All right, another thing that we noticed while we were near Checkpoint Charlie was this these bricks in the ground. Those bricks symbolized where the wall had been near Checkpoint Charlie, and this says Berlin Wall in German. Okay. Another thing that we saw while in East Berlin was this Soviet-era flag, and it says the last Kremlin flag. It's pretty cool. And then another thing we saw was this guard tower. Okay, and you can see in perspective how large these guard towers are compared to the people down there. There's myself. Okay. And so the way that JFK is going to respond to the Soviets putting up this wall, it sums it up in this quote. And it says, "Freedom has many difficulties and democracy is not necessarily perfect, but we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. or to prevent them from leaving us. All right, and I think that quote is pretty remarkable in summing up what life under communism was like. Okay, you would have to force your people to stay. Right? Now keep in mind, during the Cold War, we have the constant threat of nuclear war or nuclear holocaust breaking out. And so the size of these bombs are going to become remarkably large. All right. This bomb right here, the Tsar Bomba, this is going to be tested by the Soviets in 1961. It's going to be the largest bomb ever tested. Now you compare its size to this little dot right here. That is Hiroshima. Okay, one of the bombs, or one of the cities that was devastated by the United States during World War II. Right? And I think this puts into perspective how large these bombs have become, and on top of that, how destructive they are. All right. So that leads us to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay. Some background on the Cuban Missile Crisis. If my clicker will work. Background of the Cuban Missile Crisis is the Bay of Pigs invasion. Okay. Now JFK had okayed a mission set up by the CIA to basically invade Cuba and to start an uprising against Castro. Okay, it's eventually going to fail, but it signals to the Soviets that we are not okay with Cuba being communist. Okay, and so in October 1962, we have a U-2 spy planes flying over Cuba, taking photographs of the island, what's going on, that sort of thing. And when we start analyzing these photos, we realize, oh my gosh, the Soviets are building missile sites in Cuba. Okay. Now JFK is going to go to Khrushchev and, why are these here? Yada, yada, yada. And the Russians tell us that they are placed there to deter the United States from invading Cuba. Now that makes sense because in the Bay of Pigs invasion, we had shown that we were being somewhat aggressive. And eventually Kennedy decides, all right, the way that we're going to handle these missile sites being created in Cuba, we're not going to invade the island. If we do that, we have the possibility of World War III breaking out. So instead, we're going to enact a naval blockade around the island. All right, any Russian ship coming into the island, we're going to inspect it. If there are anything to create missiles, we're going to turn it around. Okay. Now, if the Russians ignore our blockade and just steer past our ships, maybe we open fire on them. And with that, maybe World War III breaks out. It's also very important to highlight, a naval blockade of a country is technically an act of war. Okay. However, we're not going to have war break out. We're going to rely more on diplomacy. Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General and JFK's brother, is going to be instrumental in this. What we're going to do, we're going to agree to remove missiles that we had personally stationed in Turkey and in Italy. So we're going to remove our missiles that are near the Soviet Union, and what they're going to do in return is remove their missiles from Cuba, and therefore removing the missiles near our nation. So it's a win-win situation for both sides. Okay. All right, let's talk about our last bit of information with Kennedy in the Cold War, and that, unfortunately, is his assassination. Okay, so JFK was in Texas in late 1963 to really start preparing for his re-election campaign. There were some issues in the Democratic Party in Texas in terms of unity, and so Kennedy is going to go down there, unify the party more in Texas. That way he can win Texas in the next election. Okay. On November 22nd, though, 1963, Kennedy's motorcade is going to be driving through Dallas when 3 shots ring out. Okay, the first shot is going to miss. Second shot is going to hit Kennedy in the neck, and it is going to go through him and hit the governor of Texas, and you can see him right there, who is sitting in front of Kennedy. He will not die from his injuries. The third and final shot is going to hit Kennedy in the head, and that is the kill shot on Kennedy. All right. And there is a picture of Kennedy's shirt that he was wearing when he was assassinated. And the person who's going to be accused of killing Kennedy is Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was an American citizen. He had been a United States Marine. He had been honorably discharged, and after that, he's going to move to Russia, where he actually tries to denounce his American citizenship. He's going to get married in Russia. He's eventually going to move back to the United States and settle down in Dallas, Texas. Now, it's cool to note, the FBI had been keeping tabs on Oswald. Okay, obviously they would do this because he tried to denounce his American citizenship and he has ties to the Soviet Union. The FBI, however, never informs the Secret Service about Oswald before Kennedy goes to Dallas. Okay. Now, on top of killing Kennedy, Oswald is also accused of killing a police officer that stopped to question him shortly after the assassination. Okay. Now, Oswald never admits to killing Kennedy. And he never gets to have a trial. And that's because he's going to be killed while in police custody on live television by a man named Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was a nightclub owner. He had possible ties to the mafia. And so this is where we start to see conspiracy theories be born, and maybe Oswald was killed to keep quiet. Okay. Now think about it. Our president has just been killed. And so we need to fill that position. And so Vice President Johnson is going to become president, sworn into the office just hours after JFK is assassinated. There's a picture of him on Air Force One next to Jackie Kennedy. She's still wearing the same clothes that she was in when her husband was killed next to her. I can't imagine what she's going through. And it's cool to note that the person who's swearing LBJ into office is actually a woman. And this is the only time in American history that a woman has sworn a president into office. That's kind of cool. Now, JFK was only president for a little over 1,000 days. And so because of that, a lot of his programs that he was working towards had not yet come to fruition. And we're going to see that LBJ, during his presidency, is going to rely on what JFK was going to do, and he's going to try to continue the programs that JFK had wanted to create. Okay. All right, guys, that is it for our notes today. If you have any questions, you can always leave a comment or just ask me in class. See you later.